welcome to another video here on the Critical Focus channel. First off, a big shout out to all my members who support my work. It keeps the paint flowing and the electricity running. Members do get access to the member Discord, will influence the content, the matchups, whatnot. There is a join button below if you feel so inclined. But regardless, I am happy for your support in the form of actually just watching the video, of a like and a comment, and if you haven't already, please do feel free to subscribe as well. And if you are looking to buy Warhammer merch, there is an affiliate link in the video description as well. Let's get on with the video. Wrack and Ruin. So this is the new mastery deck, but more so it is the successor, sadly in my opinion, to the Rhymeworm's Bite, because it does have some serious ping in it. Let's get cracking. As always, a big thanks to GW for sending me this rival deck ahead of time to playtest and review for you all. I will start with the searches. First up, Bloody and Bruised for inflicting damage on a fighter when 3 or more fighters are damaged. Well, that does include the fighter you just damaged. So if 2 were previously damaged, that's pretty darn basic, unless every fighter on the board is one-hit wonders. Next up is Predictable End for dealing damage with a card from this deck to an enemy fighter on a treasure token. Obviously a bit rough if your opponent is elite aggro with no interest in feature tokens, but most of the time you will have an opportunity to do this, and there is some amount of tech in this deck to make sure they end up where you want them to be. So I would definitely rate this card. Next is Unsafe Ground for inflicting damage on an enemy in an edge hex or within one of the edge hex if you are the underdog. Quite a simple card to score really. This damage does not need to come from cards, mind you. Attacks work just fine. Next up is Low on Options for discarding a power card when you have 5 Ploys in your power deck. That's pretty darn rough as an early draw, but very basic in round 3 or so. Still a bit of a brick card early on, which makes me dislike it slightly. Sure, you can use the focus ability to speed up the scoring, but you need 5 Ploys specifically in the discard pile, so I am a bit so-so on this one, honestly. Then we have an old staple Strong Start, which is a decent enough card I guess, but generally better on elite warbands, but even they're not necessarily a staple if I can help it. Lastly, Careful Advance for making a move if 2 or more fighters, that may or may not include the fighter who just moved, have move tokens and are in enemy territory, so it's a bit weird. In a way, you can actually score it after making a charge, as that's a move, as long as you in that case have 2 other fighters with move tokens specifically in enemy territory, as the card specifically asks for move tokens, but the trigger is just moving. But yeah, stroll into enemy territory with a Drisket and a couple of squigs, I guess. Let's check out the end phases. Out of the Frying Pan is 2 glory for 3 or more damaged friendly fighters that have move and or charge tokens and or enemy territory. That's a lot to ask for, even with a tech in this deck. Going into enemy territory wounded and staying alive on all 3, sure it's 2 glory, but it asks a lot. I'm not sold on it. Alone in the Dark, on the other hand, is an excellent round 2 or 3 card with no adjacent fighters. You've got some tech in here as well to make sure it happens. I quite rate this card, as we've seen these types of cards before and they've always been fairly popular staples. Spread out means we have a friendly fighter in each territory. That does include the mid zone, so mostly seems catered towards slightly bigger warbands, like at least the size of Spiteclaw Swarm, I'd say, to score it reliably. And still just 1 glory as well, so a bit rough. Living on the Edge needs a vulnerable friendly fighter to be in enemy territory for 2 glory. You can sort of ping yourself a bit with this deck, so it's not too shabby. Kind of depends on your warband selection, I'd say as well. Ploy Master is an old reprint for 1 glory if you played 3 Ploys in a round. I'm not sure I find it reliable enough for 1 glory really. You might just draw 4 upgrades, so unless your warband has some draw tech or you want to spend the time on focusing to score a 1 glory end phase, I wouldn't bother, but for something like the Headsman's Curse or Ilthari's Guardians, it might be a decent fit. Stay Close needs no fighters in edge hexes for 2 glory. I think that's quite manageable and wholly worth 2 glory. So a bit of wine, a bit of water, I'd say. Let's check the Ploys. Flee picks a friendly fighter in friendly territory and gives that fighter +3 move in the next activation step, but if that fighter moves in that activation step, they must end in unfriendly territory, I guess. Perfectly reasonable stipulation, I guess. You'll always have situations where you want to end up somewhere else than on home turf, especially useful for some centerpiece models with slow or moderate moves, like Moloch or Canaan. Fireproof reduces the damage to 1 next time a friendly fighter takes damage. Always a fantastic card, especially nasty on Grandfather's Gardeners with all their pre-existing damage reduction. Sidle up picks a friendly fighter and pushes them up to 2 hexes, but must end adjacent to 2 or more fighters. Push Goralek straight into the loving arms of a family of gits. Hello. Vicious Intent is a search ploy for when you attack to get +1 dice, or +2 if the target is undamaged. Very nasty on something like the Wielder that one-shots pretty much all things that lives. Volcanic Eruption picks a fighter, then your opponent can pick an enemy fighter. Starting with the fighter you picked, you roll a number of attack dice for each of those fighters, equal to their bounty characteristic, minimum of 1. So even if they have a bounty of 0, you still roll 1. On the result of any hammers, inflict 1 damage. Not super reliable even on a 3 bounty fighter, but the fact that this essentially picks 2 enemy fighters is quite nasty. Damned If You Do forces your enemy to decide if you get to ping one of their non-vulnerable fighters or push one of their fighters. This plays into several objectives depending on what's in your hand. The push can help you score Alone in the Dark, and the damage can help you score a couple of the searches, etc. So both effects can be quite nasty. Either way, they lose. Fault Lines picks an undamaged enemy fighter and inflicts 1 damage on that fighter. However, then your opponent can pick a fighter and inflict 1 damage. So yeah, don't play it if you have a vulnerable fighter, I guess, but otherwise it oftentimes plays into several of your objectives nonetheless, and correctly timed it will hurt them much more than it hurts you. Deadly Traps is a ping after the drive back in a drawn attack, sort of a reprint of an old card. Yeah, what to say? More ping. Confusion, we already know this card. Always a useful card, especially if you need to damage your opponents in specific places, such as on a treasure token or in an edge hex, as mentioned earlier. Ominous Rumbling also forces your opponent to choose what you get to do. Either give 2 enemy fighters stagger tokens or ping a non-vulnerable fighter. God, I hate ping. Why? That's it. So obviously a very strong Ploy deck here with lots of ping and nastiness. I really hoped not to see this type of deck again, honestly, but I suspect some people will really love it. Upgrades them. Unstoppable means that when this fighter is vulnerable and takes 1 damage, they take 0 damage. Yeah, ping immunity seems like a good idea when this deck hits the meta. Costs 2 though, but wholeheartedly worth it, I guess. Sundering Weapon gives you cleave. Yeah, decent, more decent than before, but I would probably only bother with it in heavily focused strike decks, honestly. Barge gives you access to a new core ability that this fighter can use, if not having a short remove token, to move up adjacent to an enemy fighter and then give yourself a charge token, and then you get to push an enemy fighter adjacent to you 1 hex and give them a stagger token. This one costs 2 glory. This is a pretty reliable way of controlling the board to score some of the stuff in this deck, like no enemy fighters in edge hexes or no adjacent fighters, so I can really see the merit of this card. Henchman gives you a search ability called Disciplined, which means you can change 1 symbol in the attack to single supports, but it also means this fighter can't make rerolls. I'm not really sold on it, as it denies you the rerolls from stagger tokens, for example. Fiery Temper is a 0 glory upgrade that gives you a search ability called Belligerent, which means that when you are picked to be pushed, you can opt to instead take damage to deny the push. That's pretty sweet on models that gain something from being damaged, such as Morgox or Drom, or even the Dread Pageant. They get to edge closer to Inspiring and stick around to fight. Misfortune gives you the search ability Ill-Fated to trigger after you use a core ability to inflict 1 damage on this fighter and then pass on the upgrade to another friendly fighter. I can see how that also could help Morgok, Drom and even the Dread Pageant to a quick Inspire, and also help score a couple of the cards in this deck. Great Speed, well, not much to say, could be useful, could be waste of space. Wary Tread gives you the ability to push 1 after the last power step in a battle round, but you have to not end up adjacent to any fighters. Yeah, that sure helps score Alone in the Dark as well. Rock Splitting Tread gives you the search ability Stomp immediately after your last action step in a round to deal 1 damage to a non-vulnerable fighter adjacent to this fighter. So this one first and then the previous to push away. Nasty. By the way, you have to roll a dice after using this one, and on the rollover hammer it goes away, otherwise you can just repeat the process in the next end phase. Desperate Defense is a 2 glory upgrade for -1 damage on incoming damage. then it's discarded if this fighter is inflicted damage as part of an attack. So this paired with Unstoppable then means that on your vulnerable fighter, everything under 3 damage will be mitigated, since 2 damage becomes 1 damage with this upgrade, and with Unstoppable you can't take 1 damage if you're vulnerable. Shenanigans. So much broken stuff in this deck really. I'm not really a fan, but it's certainly very powerful, and we'd best get used to these cards because they will be very popular. That is it for this review. Stay tuned for the Strike deck next, the Reckless Fury as well, as soon as I'm able to get to it. Thanks for watching, leave a like on your way out, have a great rest of your day, take care, bye.